Okay, so really quick, we're gonna start with a good old example, real quick. Follow me if you will. What is the world's longest TV show? You know, I've highlighted the first thing I noticed in red. Though it says Gunsmoke, none of the shows in the banner are actually Gunsmoke. The second thing I would like to draw your attention to are the results that I've highlighted in green. The Wikipedia article shows us that for some reason queried us for U.S. shows. Maybe that's a geotagging thing. I'm not sure. It's worth mentioning that The Simpsons ran longer than Gunsmoke, and of course Days of Our Lives ran longer than both of them, so somewhat strange results so far. Upon refining my search terms a little bit, I came to the conclusion that this question really depends on what metric one is using. As you might kind of expect. Turns out there's been a lot of television shows, and they don't all have the same formatting for episodes, so they are in different run length, different lengths of seasons. The reason I started off like this is because I want us to get all in the Googling mood. We're going to talk a lot about Googling. But anyway, I'm going to make the argument that Google doesn't actually have the answer for everything. But more specifically, the way that Google doesn't have the answer for everything is kind of significant. So we'll start with this first section, which I'll call It's Not All Google's Fault. I'm going to start off by talking about some epistemology. Obviously, in this context, how we know things at all is pretty important. Don't worry, this is going to be some pretty basic stuff. You see, there was this guy, Rene Descartes. He thought bros shouldn't cut their hair. And then Michel Foucault came around, and well, he thought bros shave their heads. He looks like such a Chad in this picture. Just kidding. The first plank of my argument is really just relying on the distinction between knowledge and wisdom, illustrated here by this picture of a cat. Google is very good at conveying information, but struggles to convey what we might call wisdom. One can read all they want, and this is certainly very useful for all those autodidactic polymaths out there, but for most of us, a teacher who can provide context and guidance isn't valuable. Of course, some of this can be facilitated virtually, but a good example of this is learning music on the internet. I tried to teach myself to play bass on the internet, and it actually went okay. There are a lot of good basic tutorials you could find, basic scales, tabs, even songwriting tips. Yet, in my experience, learning music, at least online, is lacking in some ways. To begin with, just to know where to start is a huge issue, and this is where a lot of people give up, no doubt. Even if you clear through this hurdle, you can get contradictory information sometimes, and this can be distressing, especially to a complete novice. I also found it to be profoundly alienating. Learning a new skill can be hard even in the best circumstances, and doing this completely by yourself with no sense of direction can make the process even more obtuse and frustrating than it already is. Aside from the drudgeries of learning music, there is the problem that one might not actually know what they're looking for. I'm sure everyone has typed misheard lyrics of a song into Google to try to find the name at least once. Remember back to the TV show search we did. If we didn't know how to refine that search, we would have been dead in the water there. Additionally, language powerfully shapes our ability to imagine and infer, so if someone isn't familiar with the formalized language of certain subjects, the requisition of information can become all but impossible. Our example also shows us that Google could sometimes provide deceptive answers. Obviously, one could continue through the results to find the correct information, but one couldn't be blamed for just reading the text that is shown most prominently. We'll also get into some specific tactics of manipulation here. The most common one you'll see is throwing the suffix "gate" on the end of a scandal. This means now that when anyone searches Pizzagate or whatever, all they'll see is articles about that. Another is clickbait. This one is much reviled already, so I don't think I need to go too much into that. Of course, these tactics are used widely, not just on Google as a platform. In fact, what can largely be said of these problems is that they are not all Google's fault. These are problems inherent to a search engine and much more trace the limits of raw data than the limits of Google as a tool. However, of course, to begin our second section, some of it's Google's fault. The first and perhaps most obvious example of this is that Google decides what your search returns. Of course, not in the sense that there is literally somebody deciding what is most important, but their algorithm uses a logic to rank results. So, as with any logical system, this can be gamed. And Google also places ads up high in search results to the point that it is not obvious when one is clicking on an ad all the time. Google also has begun in some cases to straight up ignore what you actually type and use their machine learning to try to divine what you actually want. They are also starting to filter out old sites from their searches so as to make the internet more advertising friendly. All of this put together kind of paints a picture, almost like I did that intentionally. But anyway, some of these amount to like serious problems with Google as a tool. This problem is compounded by the fact that they are really the only search engine in the game. There's obviously been a few other attempts at, unseating them from that, but none have been too successful, which is basically why we're all really here. And we need to talk about monopolies. If y'all haven't heard, there is some foolishness afoot in Silicon Valley. This guy thinks that monopolies are good. This guy thinks that there should be kings again. And they've been talking to this guy. But even beyond all this dark enlightenment nonsense, there hides an even deeper rot. As many of you are aware, I'm sure, the global economy has become invested in a vanishingly small number of firms, but this is perhaps best exemplified by Silicon Valley. Long has their credo been move fast and break things they did. Microsoft and IBM were perhaps the first companies that rose to the top through aggressive anti-competitive practices. The new kids in the block picked up on this quickly. Google, or Alphabet, Google's parent company, for instance, has done everything from silencing critics with their power to threatening governments of actual states to protect their monopoly. And what is perhaps worst is that Google is no way alone in this regard. We're going to look at one specific example of this because I don't feel like making this video 2 hours long. So there's this thing called the Case Act. It passed through the House in October, and it looks like it's going to pass through the Senate soon. What it will do, in effect, is create a private legal system for copyright claims. I know that sounds crazy, but listen to this. This bill creates the Copyright Claims Board, a body within the U.S. Copyright Office to decide copyright disputes. That seems somewhat innocuous, but in reality, this gives companies a non-judicial way to pursue Section 512 claims and a behind-closed-doors process to expedite those claims. This means two things. One, it will be a lot easier for companies to come after small individuals. If you pirate a lot of stuff, you might want to be worried. This will also affect online performers, probably in a bad way. Two, Silicon Valley companies can use this to actively stifle competition in the market and further strengthen their monopolies, which is probably the most likely result. This is a tribune that will be administered by civil servants, not by judges. Think about how crazy that is. Does the phrase habeas corpus mean anything to anybody? As I mentioned, these anti-competitive tactics are nothing new, but now that Elizabeth Warren has left the stage for the moment, I worry these problems are going to leave public consciousness at a time when we couldn't afford it any less. I, for one, do not welcome our new overlords in salmon shorts. In conclusion, no, I will not use DuckDuckGo. Thanks for watching.